She probably doesn't even know how jets work. Just let her tighten bolts or something." The words weren't whispered. They weren't subtle. But the woman didn't flinch. She kept walking, one slow step at a time, toward the silent stealth aircraft. On the runway, America's most advanced fighter jet stood still. Engineers scrambled. Every system read perfect. And yet, it refused to launch. Then she arrived. No uniform, no rank, just steady hands. And from the cockpit, the elite pilot's voice broke the silence. "If she's not here, I'm not flying." Every head turned. They had called her just a mechanic, but they forgot. Some people built the system from the shadows. Her name is Helen Alvarez, around 60, with decades of grit in her hands. A senior aircraft mechanic, though no one ever introduced her that way. She wasn't here for titles. She was here to make sure the jets flew and kept flying. They called her the old mechanic lady, not out of affection, but because no one really knew her. Or maybe no one ever bothered to ask. Helen Alvarez had been on this airbase longer than some of the new lieutenants had been alive. She didn't wear medals. She didn't show stripes. But she knew the sound of a failing O-ring before it hissed. And she could identify engine imbalance just by feel. No diagnostic needed. She'd been here since the Gulf War days, back when hangars echoed with shouting and sweat, not digital screens and sterile silence. Back when you had to trust your ear, your instinct, not a flashing warning on a screen. And somehow Helen had carried that same instinct into the future, into this polished world of fifth-gen stealth fighters and biometric cockpit locks. She had no office, just a rolling red toolbox and a worn pair of gloves. She clocked in early, clocked out late, and never left a single bolt unturned. While others talked protocols and blamed systems, Helen worked. She worked through holidays, through birthdays, through the storm of new hires who thought manuals were smarter than hands. No one ever saw her eat lunch, but everyone saw her on the tarmac, crawling under engines long after the sun had set. Her coveralls, dark brown, unbranded, had faded into the same color as the concrete beneath her boots. Commanders rotated. Pilots came and went. But Helen stayed. She wasn't loud. She wasn't soft either. She simply moved with purpose. If a plane grounded mid-check, they'd radio maintenance. But if it grounded mid-flight and returned shaking, they radioed Helen. Most of the younger engineers didn't ask why. To them, she was just part of the landscape. Background, support. Old guard at best. But there were whispers. One rumor said she helped build one of the early stealth prototypes in a black site no one could name. Another claimed she was offered a desk job in D.C. and turned it down without a word. Helen never confirmed anything. She didn't need to. Her hands told stories louder than most people's resumes, and every aircraft she touched flew smoother, landed safer. But she'd never once asked for recognition. No photos, no plaques, just silence. A woman with no rank, yet more authority than most officers in the room. And so they called her the old mechanic lady, until the day the jet wouldn't fly, and the pilot refused to launch without her. They didn't say it to her face, not always, but she heard it anyway. She's just one of the old techs, probably doesn't even understand stealth systems. The younger engineers came in with crisp degrees and clean boots. They had tablets in their hands and algorithms in their mouths, and they thought Helen Alvarez was a relic, an outdated nameplate attached to a fading tradition. She didn't argue, never raised her voice. She simply kept showing up. When the F-35s rolled into the hangar for scheduled diagnostics, the junior team took the lead. Helen would step aside, wipe her hands on the same brown cloth she always carried, and observe. She watched them misread power curve variances, watched them misalign thermal signatures by a half degree. Small things, but fatal in flight. Once, a fresh recruit, cocky, bright-eyed, tried to recalibrate the radar absorption node on a Raven-class prototype. He insisted the manual was outdated and ran his own script. The system shorted. Static flashed across the interface, and a low pulsing hum started emanating from the belly of the aircraft. He froze. The other stepped back. Helen didn't say a word. She just moved forward, lifted the panel with 2 fingers, twisted a pressure valve, reset a thermal buffer by hand, and killed the hum. 15 seconds. No tools. No fuss. The recruit nodded awkwardly. No one said thank you. Instead, someone muttered under their breath, "Lucky guess." It wasn't just the engineers. Even the officers overlooked her. Briefings were scheduled without her input. Reports were submitted without her review. When someone needed parts logged or bolt torque specs verified, they called her. But when the brass showed up with their polished boots and perfect smiles, she was invisible. They'd ask, "Who's in charge of maintenance?" And someone would gesture vaguely, Helen, I guess." Like she was furniture, a fixture, not a person. But Helen didn't need their permission to matter. She remembered every jet she ever worked on, by serial number, by sound. She knew which ones rattled too hard on takeoff, which ones ran hotter than they should. She had log problems no system ever flagged. Her mind was a vault of quiet precision. Still, to the young ones, she was just there. "She probably still thinks stealth is just about shape and paint," one whispered, forgetting Helen once helped test early plasma damping in a Nevada wind tunnel, decades before stealth became a buzzword. But she never corrected them. That wasn't her way. Instead, she kept showing up, earlier than everyone, staying later than anyone, fixing what others missed, watching mistakes happen, and fixing them before they reached the runway. No lectures, no ego, just the hands, the eyes, the silence. And though they dismissed her as just a mechanic, some part of them knew when the real trouble hit, they'd want her in the room. It started with a simple question. A young technician, fresh out of the academy, still adjusting to life on base, looked up from a console and asked, "Why has she never left this place? 40 years, and not once transferred?" The others shrugged. No one really knew. Helen Alvarez was just there, like the tarmac or the hangars, permanent, unmoving, part of the base itself. But that question lingered, and in a place where secrets tend to echo longer than answers, it only takes one curious voice to open the cracks. Flashback, 1989. The desert was silent, stark. Harsh winds kicking up red sand against rows of metal hangars that didn't officially exist. Inside one of them, a younger Helen, no gray in her hair, but the same eyes, stood over a jet that had no name. Its surface was coated with strange, matte material. Its wings were angular and unorthodox. Its engine system had no known blueprint. She wasn't there to turn wrenches. She was there to write the code. Back then, stealth wasn't just about shape. It was about balance. Between airflow, heat signature, electromagnetic resonance, radar reflectivity. It was like trying to make a flame invisible in the dark. Helen was the one who cracked the early algorithm for dynamic signature shifting, an adaptive system that adjusted airflow and exhaust pressure in real time, responding to environmental changes in enemy radar frequencies on the fly. She tested it, lived it, breathed it. She watched prototypes burn. She saw one of her closest colleagues ejected at Mach 1.4 when a stability function failed mid-climb. She didn't cry at the funeral. She just went back to the terminal, day after day, line by line, until it worked, until that jet, black as the night sky, flew clean across an enemy radar field and left no trace behind. But the mission, the base, the code, all of it was classified. Level 0 clearance, locked tighter than any warhead. She signed the papers. She vanished from official records, not from the world, just from recognition. No promotion, no medal, just a name on a restricted personnel list, buried under black ink. Years later, the tech went public. Newer generations picked it up, built on it, patented it, but none of them knew Helen. None of them knew where it began. Back in the present, the young technician stared at her from across the hangar. Helen was bent over a cooling coil, adjusting a wire with tweezers steady as a sniper's hands. "She's been here longer than some of the jets we fly," he whispered. A senior engineer replied without looking up. "You ever wonder why no one questions her access?" The kid blinked. "She's never badged in, never been escorted. She walks through restricted zones like she owns the floor. Because she built it, kid, the man added, long before you were even born. But Helen never confirmed anything. She let the rumors stay rumors, let the code stay hidden. She didn't need her past to speak for her. Her silence was louder than most people's legacies. And her legacy was still flying in every stealth jet that left that hangar. The base hadn't buzzed like this in years. An experimental jet, the X-97 Raven, was about to fly its first full-field stealth demonstration. Top brass from the Pentagon had flown in that morning, suits sharp, eyes sharper. Their presence was a signal. This wasn't just a routine test. This was Judgment Day. The X-97 was the crown jewel of fifth-gen stealth evolution. Faster, quieter, smarter. Built to disappear into the sky without a trace, this flight would determine whether it lived or was scrapped before ever seeing combat. The jet sat on the tarmac like a predator in stillness. Wings tucked tight, cockpit sealed, matte black surface absorbing the midday sun. From a distance it looked unreal, like it had been carved out of shadow and wind. In the tower, tension simmered. Final systems check. All green across the board. Fuel, optimal. Radar sig, null. Nav, synced. A young officer looked at the status feed, nodded and turned to the panel of visiting officials. Gentlemen, she's ready. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reed Marsh, one of the most trusted pilots in the program, cracked his knuckles and tightened his gloves. He had flown Raptors, Falcons, and Ghost trainers, but nothing quite like this. X-97 Raven, this is Tower. You are clear for ignition sequence. Roger that, Reed responded. His voice was calm, precise. He flipped the switches. Primary engine coils hummed. Avionics lit. HUD display stable. But nothing else happened. No intake rumble. No turbine whine. No thrust cycle. The aircraft stayed dead still. Tower, I've got all green, but no lift. No response from the starter. A beat of silence. The tech station on the ground went into a quiet panic. 4 engineers gathered around the main console, tapping through diagnostics, one muttering under his breath. We just ran a full sweep. No errors. Batteries full. Circuits clean. Could it be the new interface script? No, that passed yesterday's loop test. Reboot it. Already did. Force cold reset. Still nothing. The Pentagon observers glanced at each other. Subtle but sharp. Doubt was already creeping in. Colonel Harlan, the ranking officer in charge of the demonstration, frowned. Get someone from avionics over there now. Chaos. Tension spread like fuel vapor. Ground crews moved faster, eyes locked on screens, but nothing worked. Reed tried once more, toggling startup commands manually, bypassing automation. Still dead. The Raven, this sleek monster of engineering, sat quiet, like it was waiting for someone, or refusing to move for just anyone. One engineer cursed under his breath, stepping away from the console. I don't get it. Everything reads perfect. It's like it knows something's missing. That's when someone, quietly, almost like an afterthought, said, "Where's Helen?" Nobody answered, because until that moment, no one had even noticed she wasn't there. Meanwhile, at the far edge of the hangar, she was adjusting a loose coolant sensor on an older training craft. Oblivious to the chaos, or maybe not, because Helen Alvarez never moved fast, but she always moved when it mattered. Captain Reed Marsh sat motionless in the cockpit, hands hovering over the control panel. Everything was green, systems nominal, no alerts, no faults. Yet the aircraft, the cutting-edge X-97 Raven, wouldn't start. He blinked once, scanning the HUD, rechecked the ignition protocols, ran a cold boot override, tried the auxiliary backup. Silence. Still nothing, he muttered. Outside, engineers huddled around terminals, whispering, shaking heads, confused, nervous. This jet wasn't just a prototype. It was a promise. A billion-dollar evolution in stealth warfare. And right now, that promise sat dead in the water. Reed exhaled slowly, eyes drifting past the glowing readouts. Through the canopy, his gaze swept across the runway, the control trucks, the figures moving with urgency below. And then he saw her, at the far edge of the airstrip, standing still. Helen Alvarez. No safety vest, no headset, no clipboard, just her, arms crossed, face calm, watching, not interfering, not asking to be included, just present. Reed's eyes lingered. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her. Years ago, before he earned his call sign, she'd helped him during a routine post-flight check. He'd been green, still trying to impress senior pilots. Something about his controls felt off. He didn't trust the diagnostics. Helen hadn't said much. Just walked up, tapped under the panel, adjusted a pressure valve, and saved him from what could have been a mid-air systems failure. She hadn't taken credit then, but he'd remembered. She always shows up when it matters. He leaned toward his mic. Tower, this is Raven 1. I'm requesting one last systems clearance. Roger, Raven 1, came the reply. Dispatching additional ground crew? Negative. Reed cut in. I want Helen Alvarez. A pause. Repeat that? The older mechanic. She needs to check this aircraft. Captain, with all due respect, if she's not here, I'm not flying. Silence. Then chaos. Inside the command tent, officers turned to each other, stunned. A Pentagon official arched an eyebrow. One technician stammered, "That's not in protocol." Another said, "She doesn't even work on this model." But the colonel in charge, Harlan, remained quiet. He stared out at the tarmac, at the still jet, and the still woman. "Who gave him that authority?" someone asked. Harlan replied coldly, "No one, but it's done." A junior staffer was sent running. He hesitated when he reached her, as if unsure how to speak. Helen simply nodded. She began walking. No words, no rush. Just calm, even steps toward the Raven. Every head turned. Reed watched her approach, eyes steady. No smile, no hesitation. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the generals, the engineers, the buzz of voices. She just walked toward the aircraft, like she had always belonged there. And in that moment, the base seemed to hold its breath. Inside the cockpit, Reed adjusted his grip on the stick. A faint smile formed beneath his helmet. He didn't know the politics, didn't care about the eyes watching. He only knew one thing. If Helen Alvarez said the jet was ready, then it was ready, and no system in the world could replace that. The silence on base didn't end when Helen reached the jet. If anything, it deepened. Not with confusion, but with tension. Questions buzzed behind clipped voices. Eyes followed her like a shadow moving against regulations. But then someone spoke. A man in his late 60s, dressed in an old-style service uniform with silver trim. He stood among the Pentagon observers, arms crossed, jaw tight. Colonel Everett Shaw. Retired now, but once, decades ago, he had served as lead crew chief in one of the earliest stealth development programs. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. If Helen Alvarez isn't here, that engine doesn't get built. That aircraft doesn't fly. Period. Everyone turned. Shaw stared at the jet, then at Helen, who was now inspecting a small panel beneath the fuselage like it was second nature. His tone wasn't reverent, it was absolute. She was the one who cracked the thermal equilibrium feedback algorithm back in '91, the same one we still use, modified, on every stealth platform since. The younger engineers looked stunned. Wait, that algorithm? You mean the one that auto-adjusts exhaust vent angles in real time? I thought that was developed by a team at... Shaw cut in again. She didn't lead the team. She was the team. A murmur rippled across the group. One of the visiting brass flipped open a tablet, accessing a secure archive. Helen's name wasn't listed as lead author. She wasn't listed at all. But in the supplementary data, there was a string of code identifiers, a pattern, a signature, and one line deep in the metadata logs read simply ALV 7.1H. It wasn't a name, but it was hers. Another file opened. This one marked Restricted Prior Level 5, declassified only weeks ago under routine archival review. The file held a mission log from the Black Range testing grounds dated 1994. It detailed a catastrophic test flight. 2 engineers lost, 1 survived. She refused reassignment, declined promotion, refused interview or recognition. Instead, she filed for permanent reassignment to stay at the base, work on maintenance, and keep the birds safe from the inside. The commanding officer at the time wrote, Alvarez has chosen silence, not because she is ashamed, but because she believes the tech should speak louder than she ever could. The words appeared on screen in bold. The room grew still. Back on the tarmac, Helen closed the panel gently, gave a small nod to the pilot. The Raven systems blinked to life. She walked away before anyone could speak to her. Colonel Shaw turned back to the group. You've all flown her work. You've all trusted tech she built without knowing it, and she never asked you to. One young technician, barely 24, whispered, Why didn't she ever tell anyone? Shaw shook his head. Because legends don't ask to be remembered. They know their legacy flies. And with that, the truth wasn't just revealed. It was recognized. The wind was quiet across the airfield. Everyone watched. Helen Alvarez stood before the X-97 Raven, a jet designed with billions of dollars, encrypted algorithms, and the most advanced aerospace minds in the world. Yet none of them could get it to move. She placed one hand gently on the underside of the wing. Her fingers traced a faint seam in the carbon alloy paneling, a part no one else had noticed, hidden between the third and fourth maintenance access ports. No labels, no warning tag, just memory. She reached into her back pocket, not for a tool, just a small cloth, folded 3 times, old with grease and use. She kneeled beside the wing and pulled back the panel, unscrewing a single bolt. 1, not 2, not a whole housing unit, just 1 bolt. A soft, metallic click echoed in the space between awe and disbelief. She stood up, wiped her hands, and took 3 steps back. No words, no instructions. Then she raised her hand, palm forward, steady, a signal older than any digital checklist. It's ready. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reed Marsh didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. His hands moved instinctively. Throttle, ignition, flight prep. This time the sequence responded instantly. The engines purred to life, quiet as a breath. The Raven's sensors recalibrated themselves without delay. HUD flickered green, steady, alive. Raven 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Copy, tower. Launching now. Wheels rolled. Nose lifted. Wings cut into the sky with surgical silence. The aircraft ascended clean, smooth, with none of the vibration or tension from earlier tests. It banked east, hit stealth mode, and vanished from radar just as the protocol had promised. On the ground, everyone stared at the sky, or rather, where the jet used to be. Inside the mission tent, a Pentagon official, decorated, composed, and usually unfazed, removed his headset slowly. He turned to face the open hangar bay, where Helen still stood, watching the clouds like she'd done it 1,000 times. Who is she? He asked. No, really, who is she? Colonel Harlan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her. Not with authority, not with suspicion, but with the kind of realization that hits like a weight you didn't know you'd been carrying. He stepped out onto the tarmac. Helen turned toward him calmly, the wind brushing loose strands of gray from her temple. The colonel asked softly but firmly, Ma'am, what's your full name? Helen looked at him for a long second, then at the crowd behind him, at the engineers, at the soldiers, at the pilots who once walked past her. She smiled faintly. Not out of pride, but something deeper, something quieter. Just a mechanic, she said, like they always said. No one spoke, not even the brass, because in that moment, the weight of everything unspoken finally settled in. The years she'd been invisible, the systems she'd built, the lives she'd protected without ever stepping into the spotlight. Her voice didn't rise. Her posture didn't change. She didn't claim credit. She simply told the truth, the kind only a person with nothing left to prove can say. And then she turned, walked away, back toward the hangar, back toward the toolbox that didn't carry her name, back to the shadows where she'd always belonged and where she was strongest. In the sky, Raven 1 made a flawless pass, stealth systems perfectly engaged. Reed's voice came through the comm, low and even. I don't know what she did, but I'd trust her over any tech in the world. At that moment, no one called her the old mechanic. No one dared, because now they knew. Some legends don't fly in cockpits. They make sure others can. The next morning, the hangar was unusually still. No alarms, no rushing boots, just early sunlight stretching across the concrete, warming the metal skin of the Raven parked silently in its bay. Helen Alvarez arrived like she always did, early, unannounced. She pushed her red toolbox down the center lane of the hangar, same as ever. But something was different. This time, people moved aside. Not because they didn't see her, but because now they did. As she passed, engineers paused. Pilots lowered their coffee cups. Officers straightened instinctively. And when she reached the far wall, where her workbench had stood quietly for years, they were all waiting. The team. The same crew that once dismissed her as just a mechanic. They stood in uniform lines, some in flight suits, some in coveralls. And as she stopped beside them, they didn't speak. They saluted, every single one of them. Not because they were ordered, not because of rank, but because of respect. Helen didn't salute back. She simply nodded once, slowly, deeply, and wheeled her toolbox past them into the open light of the tarmac. Later that week, a new metal plate appeared above Hangar Bay 3. It wasn't large, it wasn't flashy, but the lettering was clean, centered, and permanent. Alvarez Bay, honor to the quiet. No one made an announcement. No email was sent. But word spread fast. That nameplate stayed untouched. By dust, by time, by anyone who passed under it. Inside the maintenance lounge, a group of younger technicians gathered around a table. Laid out before them were old notebooks, oil-stained, frayed at the corners, written in Helen's careful hand. No diagrams, no equations. Just instinct, turned into shorthand. One of them flipped through a page, whispered, "This one line explains a sensor failure we've been chasing for weeks." Another added, "Why wasn't any of this in the official manual?" A senior engineer nearby replied without looking up, "Because some things can't be taught. They have to be remembered." From that day on, Helen's notebooks were treated like manuals, not by regulation, but by reverence. On the main hallway screen near the operations center, a new slide began looping quietly. Black background, white text, no fanfare, just a single quote. She didn't need medals. She only needed the planes to fly right. No name was attached, but everyone knew, and for the first time, even the air felt like it understood. Helen never mentioned the sign, never asked who made it. She just kept showing up. Toolbox rolling, hands steady, heart quiet, and the jets kept flying. Because behind every shadow in the sky was someone like her, who never needed to be seen to make history soar. How many brilliant minds do we overlook each day, simply because they don't wear rank or speak loudly? How many Helens walk among us, quiet, steady, carrying knowledge that can't be Googled, earned in classrooms, or stamped on a certificate? We live in a world that celebrates innovation, speed, youth, and visibility. And yet, the most critical systems, the ones that keep planes in the air, hospitals running, families afloat, are often held together by people no one notices. People who don't ask for credit. People whose strength isn't found in what they say, but in what they do, silently. Helen Alvarez was never after recognition. She didn't step into the spotlight to prove anything. She simply did the work, day after day, decade after decade, until the system depended on her without even knowing it. That's the truth we're often afraid to admit. We mistake titles for value. We confuse presence with impact. We assume knowledge must come wrapped in degrees or delivered in perfect grammar. But experience, instinct, loyalty, those things don't shout. They whisper, over time, through action. This story wasn't just about a jet or a pilot or a mission. It was about how we measure worth in the military, in the workplace, in life. We've all seen someone passed over because of age, because they don't fit the culture, because they don't market themselves like others do. But here's the question this story leaves behind. What would happen if we looked again? What would we see in that quiet woman in the corner of the workshop, in the older man fixing wires behind the scenes, in the janitor who remembers every bolt of the old building, or the nurse who doesn't talk much, but saves lives every shift. So today, this isn't just a tribute to Helen Alvarez. It's a reminder. Some of the greatest systems in the world are still running, not because of the newest minds, but because of the ones who never left. And maybe, just maybe, we need to stop asking who's the loudest and start noticing who's still here, quietly keeping everything from falling apart. Have you ever worked with someone like Helen? Someone who was underestimated until the day they quietly saved the day? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to read your stories. And if this story moved you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who still believes in quiet strength. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one, where maybe, just maybe, the next forgotten hero is someone you've walked past your whole life.